In focus this morning, KGW political analyst Len Bergstein is joining us now live in studio to break down some of the key things to watch for today. Good morning, Len.
Good morning, Brenda.
Okay, let's start out first with voter turnout. In Oregon, we're on pace, to exceed what we saw in the 2016 general election. What is motivating all those voters?
Well, there's more drama than we're used to in a midterm, kind of a non-presidential year, so voters are excited. First of all, we've got a very exciting governor's race, two very impressive candidates, as you've been talking about this morning. Number two, we have a kind of a small but significant bouquet of ballot measures, and they range in a lot of hot-button issues from housing all the way to reproductive rights. And then third is people have spent a lot of money in the campaigns to get people's attention. Your viewers have been bombarded, and so they've been responding appropriately.
So what about Portland City Council? That's another hot race here. Can you talk about the significance of the race between Joanne Hardesty and Loretta Smith?
Well, our Portland viewers will be making history. They'll be electing the first woman African-American to Portland City Council. It's sad to say that happens in 2018, but it's happening, and it's an exciting occurrence. The two of them are very strong and different personalities, so they've attracted some interest in the race. And Joanne Hardesty had a very strong primary, and so the question is whether Loretta Smith can be the comeback kid in this particular race. Whoever wins will add both kind of a change in math and chemistry to the 5-person city council we have, because 3 votes rule in the city council. So the mayor's got to figure out who of the new person can he count on.
And we cannot forget about the people over in Washington. There's a big battle going on there between incumbent Jaime Herrera Beutler and newcomer Carolyn Long.
Right.
So talk more about the national implications of that race.
Well, you're exactly right. There's a national guessing game about whether the Democrats can flip the House of Representatives, 435 votes, from red to blue. And the magic number is 23. And one of those 23 happens to be in Washington State, where people are focusing on an incumbent, Herrera Beutler, trying to fight off a challenger who's had a very strong race. So, again, there are national implications in terms of in the year of Trump dominating politics as to whether or not there'll be some balance back in U.S. government if the Democrats can control the House.
I know you live for this day, and it's going to be interesting to watch. Len, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hey, stay with us for complete election coverage. We are tracking both the local and the national races. And NBC News special, The Vote, America's Future, starts at 7 p.m. And then at 7:30, our local coverage will begin live on KGW.com. Local results start rolling in at 8, and we'll wrap it all up tonight with a special hour-long edition of KGW News at 11.